All right, my friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about two lateral movements that are great to practice that translate into a lot of more advanced skills. So you can think of these as foundational skills that have a lot of layers that can be added to them. The first one is a cross-body simple to the same hand. And I'll break that movement down along with the next one, as well as show you how it can be transformed into other skills later in this video. The second skill is a switch. So it's a cross-body lateral simple. Called different things in classical juggling. It's just going to be a lateral simple. You can put the word switch on there if you like. I like to call it a cross-body simple switch, simply because we are crossing the body as opposed to going towards the side of the body that the bell is in the rack or hand of, and I am switching. You can do these continuously, and in this video we'll also explore tying them together. So let's look at how we can learn these movements, what 3D skills, before we even juggle, are handy to come before we start flipping the bell, and then we'll look at some variations of these. So let's look at that cross-body simple. So this movement originates from a cross-body clean. In my course, Moving 3D, I go through all of these different patterns, with some of the emphasis on then being able to turn them into juggling patterns later on. So our cross body clean, going across the body. If you're familiar with a good rack position, if you're familiar with kettlebells in general, you can learn this one. From this rack position, I like to rotate to start so I can orientate being able to cast directly to the side. We don't want to cast out in front of us or too far behind us. As I cast, I'm going to make sure not to just drop the bell. So I want to be able to create these beautiful circles here. So I'm going to cast about 45 degrees up, extend my arm, and then turn my thumb across the body. That's going to be the easiest way to do the crossbody clean. A little different for adding that flip. So pop out, come across the body. And as I come across the body, I'm not going to let that bell go too far away from me here, because I'm going to have to bring it back in. Easy to smack the wrist if you do that. So instead, after I cast and come across the body, about midway, I'm going to leave my elbow and then start to clean or curl my arm into that rack position. So it's a pretty tight movement here when we rack it, a looser, longer movement when we cast. Just like so. I want to be able to create that fluid sense of tension as I go through this movement, casting, letting that bell drop, not bending the elbow and muscling it across, also not getting yanked around like a puppet. And so I want to find a balance. I want to be long, but I also want to be engaged. Now, usually I would teach this one with some different footwork techniques. When we juggle and when we start to move 3D, we don't want to be stuck with our feet facing forward. We want to be able to move with the weight. There's always a bit of a weight bias when we're moving, in particular, lateral across the body. I don't want to be loaded and have that weight distribution, that's a hard word apparently, on both legs. I want to be able to cast and bias towards the leg I am leading towards. Sometimes people find this challenging to figure out what side they're going towards and therefore what leg should bend. Just think about it. Where's the weight going and where am I needing to load and connect with the ground to make that weight more accessible to move? And so in this case, If I cast out here, I can just turn my feet slightly towards the direction that the bell is going in. This will help for a number of different reasons I won't get into, but basically my feet and my knees are going away from the path of the bell instead of going here. And it also allows me to have a bit of this buoyancy. It's really important with juggling that we include the legs. Juggling isn't an upper body workout or sport or discipline. It's a full body integrated method of moving with the kettlebell in space. So cast, lean, and we come here. You can practice that on both sides. Should be able to make this feel nice and smooth, and there shouldn't be any one place in that pattern where that bell pulls you or suddenly there's a buildup in force. That's how you know you're moving towards fluid tension, is the whole ride and movement feels similar in rhythm and tension. So that is the underlying pattern for the crossbody simple. Now, if we were to change this now to include our flip, first let's talk about the simple flip. As we do in Juggling Foundations, my beginner's course, we learn the 3D patterns first, and then we learn the basic flips in front of the body, and then we tie them together. So if you want a more detailed journey of learning this, go check out Moving 3D and Juggling Foundations. If I'm going to execute that crossbody simple, I'm now going to keep my feet facing forwards. So I'm not necessarily going to do this because I don't need to build up that much momentum and release over here. It's important that we keep this movement tight to the body. So if you find yourself rotating, you've gone too far because it can throw off your balance really easily. So chest forwards. You can side bend coil a little bit on this side if you want to just open up this side. But for the most part, our chest is forward. This is a lateral movement, but my body's in a pretty sagittal position facing forwards. So I've cast. The only difference now when I cast is that instead of leading with my thumb, I'm going to lead with my palm going across the body like that. Cast, my palm leads the way. My thumb is going to be on top of the handle, ready to push downwards. Now this is one way that we can do our simple flip. For those who need a refresher, our simple flip is when we rotate the handle downwards as opposed to a reverse flip where we rotate that handle up and over. So reverse flip and simple. Now when I'm doing that simple in front of my body from a swing, I use my 4 fingers to push down to create that spin. But we can also, in this scenario, use our thumb to push down to create that same spin. It's a whole lot easier than having to rotate all the way around. Makes it awkward to bend up. Just don't do it. So I come across my body. I'm naturally going to start to curl again around that midway point. And I'm going to think about releasing that bell not away from me, but upward slightly, like this. Here's the difference. So basically, I'm going to wait. I go down first, and then I'm going to curl, and as that bell starts to rise upwards, that's when I'm going to release it, as opposed to casting, going across the body, and then releasing it. One is going to be a lot more controlled, going upwards, because that bell is just going to be released up. The other one's going to be released outwards. Makes it a lot more inconsistent and difficult to catch. So I've casted, I'm coming up. I'm going to keep this flip pretty close to the body. So basically, I'm going to line up just outside my shoulder. If you think about a vertical column right outside the shoulder, that's where I want this one to go. No farther and no closer. That column is really important for a lot of different reasons, for different variations of all of these skills as you improve. It's important that we line up this vertical column with that simple flip. So that's your first skill to practice, our crossbody simple. Keep it close. When you catch it, I want to think also about now riding that arc downwards, extending my arm, and then coming back to my rack position. Don't keep your arm bent when you're riding back across. Also, don't let that bell pull you down. Again, fluid tension throughout the whole skill. Any other notes on that? No, let's go ahead and move on. So now looking at our crossbody simple switch, also called our lateral simple switch or lateral simple. Now we're going to expand our movement to include a larger range of motion. So if the crossbody simple included a little shorter and smaller arc, now we're going to extend this out, widen the feet and the footwork, and start to utilize a little more space and to achieve a little more height. So the underlying pattern that can go with this one is going to be our crossbody tactical switch. Very similar to crossbody clean, to the same hand, but now I'm going to switch hands. And this just allows us to explore a little wider range of motion, as well as we're not rotating as much to get that clean position like we did when we did the crossbody clean to the same hand. So we're casting out exact same fashion that we did with the crossbody clean. Now I'm just going to rise up, and as I rise up, I'm going to turn my hand like such, and so I create this vertical window with the handle. Now that is where my opposite hand is going to insert right into a position where the bell is meeting my wrist, and it should meet me in a rack position. Up, down. You want to be able to catch it on the rise, not as it's coming down, and you also don't need to insert too early, like I just did and jammed my finger. So this is a long movement, and you bring it in. Don't need to go too far out. We don't need to be pulling it back in. Should be fairly simple. This is a really good movement to load up the weight. If you are familiar with classical juggling or are competing, a great movement to load up, let's say go twice as heavy as you usually would for juggling, to start to feel not only that pull on the arm that is so associated with being able to throw mills in classical juggling, but also it allows you to work on your footwork. The same footwork you would use for loading up your mills and for weight distribution. Having a difficult time with that word distribution today. All right, so let's talk about the footwork. So I was a little more narrow for that crossbody simple, and usually this footwork is very associated with freestyle skills within kettlebell juggling. Freestyle, a lot of things are close to the body. There's not as much need to be nice and wide because it just makes movements more difficult. Classical juggling, I'm quite often in a much wider stance because they're bigger throws and I need to be able to distribute that weight and have more balance throughout my body. So being wider is just a more stable base. A little harder to be more creative, but fills the purpose of throwing weights higher, heavier, and with more rotations. So for the purpose of practicing the crossbody simple switch, we're going to try a bit of a wider stance. Now, we can bias towards one side, just like we did learning the crossbody clean. And then eventually you won't need to. You can just have your feet facing forwards, maybe a little bit of a natural bias towards one side. So if I start going this way, I'm going to start in neutral. And what I'm going to do is as I cast, usually I do it as I cast, so that bell's traveling upwards, I'm not weighted, I can pivot my feet in the direction that the bell is now going to be traveling across to. So if it's going to the left, my feet are pointing to the left. I'm a little more biased with my weight on my left leg. So I've come here, reset, cast, pivot, here, cast, pivot, here, cast, pivot, come across. Again, I teach this in much more clarity and detail in Moving 3D if you're interested. That footwork is crucial and is often one of the most undermined or underappreciated things with athletes coming into something like classical juggling or juggling in general. So now that we've covered that crossbody tactical clean, now let's get into the switch. So I'm utilizing the same simple flip as I did with the crossbody, the same hand. Now I'm just going to widen it out. So instead of curling here, I'm going to, with my wider stance, come across and allow that bell to create a longer path up to about here. And I'll show you what I mean by here. Let's get precise and intentional. So if you stick out your arm 90 degrees, or I guess parallel with the ground would be an easier way of saying that, we want to be slightly higher, and then I just want a soft elbow. So I don't want to be throwing it with and catching with an extended hand out here. That's a bit too far away from me. I don't want to be pulled too far over to this leg, because I'm gonna then need to go to the other side. So I just want to be soft with my elbow. That's a good position to throw to. It's important to always have a target to throw to, so we're not just focusing on the release, we are intentionally releasing into a place where it's going to be the most easy to catch. About here is great, okay? Now, as I release it, the release, again, is with my thumb, and I'm gonna make sure, so importantly, that this catching hand, it's good to label. This is my releasing hand because it has the bell. This is my catching hand. It's about to receive the bell. Is right on top, like this. Not down here, not up here, literally right on top of the bell. And so as I release it, that handle is going to travel right into my hands. The easiest way to catch any flip is by making sure your receiving hand is where it needs to be, so there's no chance of missing the bell. My hand's too high, I could miss it. But if my hand is right on top of the bell that the handle is spinning around, there's no way that that handle is not going to hit my hand. In which case, it's just a matter of closing my hand to catch. This is the biggest thing that I teach new students when they come into juggling, is be intentional with both hands. They should always be working together, communicating, and by no means should your hand be by your side. That can take some time to get used to. So I've come up, I've flipped, I've caught with my hand open to the side. And now what I can do is just shift over to go the other way. Eventually, doing continuous is great. And then also, for starting, this is great. Okay, I do one side, I then practice the other side, and then I can string two together, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. Now, I'm moving a little bit with my feet side to side. That's okay if that feels natural. Awesome. How a lot of people do these, however, is just a little more centered, still wide. I just don't need to turn my feet, which can be a lot to think about when you're first learning. So we have our crossbody simple switch and our crossbody simple to the same hand. Now let's look at why these two movements are so foundational to so many different skills. Let's start with the crossbody simple to the same hand. This one in particular for freestyle is where you're going to see a lot of convenience. A lot of times when we're doing behind the back skills, we're going under the leg to the same hand, more likely. We're using that same release across the body, releasing tight. And a lot of people get in trouble when they blow past that point. So they go too far to the side without curling early. And so when they release it, they have to adapt and it gets ugly. So practicing really refining and making that flip vertical right in this column outside the shoulder and tight to the body with a nice quick spin is going to help a lot. Not only for movements like I've just shown you, going behind the back in various ways, as well as in different rotations, but also anything under the leg, traveling, let's say, into a rack position, or an elbow bump, or even something like a under the leg simple or oblique mill transition. Very similar release point right here. Other variations include actually releasing from behind the back. So if I release behind the back, I also technically come to a similar position to then be able to release consistently. And so it's a really good idea to practice this movement, and you'll see how it relates to a lot of different skills. Trust me on that. Now let's look at the lateral switch. Simple lateral switch. So this movement is really relative for different classical movements. And so if I'm simply practicing doing my flips across the body, or eventually our mills, this is a really good idea to practice because it gets you familiar with A, a wider stance, B, a wider circle and arc, and then C, also just the general force and the shape of everything that we're doing is wider. Think of freestyle as a little more creative and tighter. Classical is a little less creative, although there's tons of room for creativity, and it's longer. It's a little wider. So this movement sets us up with the feet. That helps us build up into our mills. That also helps us with a lot of different skills that need to be caught here. So remember, the simple crossbody to the same hand was caught tight to the body. We're catching this one around here. And this is a really important position that we see in a ton of different skills in terms of the catching point. So if it's our mills, I'm generally catching about here. This allows me to then be able to build momentum into the next movement. If I catch any lower, it gets really dangerous because that bell's weighing so much already. And if I catch it but don't have a really firm grip, it slips, it could hit your foot. Happens to jugglers who don't know where a good catching point is, and therefore if they overthrow a bell, where to say no to a catch. So this is a really good catching position. It also sets us up to go across the body really well. So let's say I'm doing this combination right here. For example, a more advanced combination. What I'm needing to do is after I catch that under leg, simple, I need momentum to be able to build up into that oblique over the shoulder, catching behind the back. And so if I mean, maybe I could get away with it, but if you go too low and your catch isn't in a good position to then be able to recycle momentum, it's going to be really difficult to go back or transition into the next skill. So this point right here is a really important one to remember, that we want to be able to throw to with a lot of movements, including if I'm doing something like a behind the back tap. If I catch this one too low, it's really difficult to build up into another movement. But if I know where I want to catch it and I adapt so I'm able to catch it there, now I'm able to transition into any skill I want because I have enough momentum. Same is true with our release point. So that's the catch point. That's important, and why practicing this one intentionally is awesome. Now also for releases, as I go for my mill release, I'm generally in this 45-degree position here. And I'm not going to be fully extended because I need my elbow bent to be able to push, to flip the handle. And so, again, we pass that same point where we are catching and being familiar with that crossbody simple switch. Same is true for a lot of different mill variations, like this lateral heli mill. Release. Right here. So it's very important to get familiar with those points. That concludes why these two movements are really great to practice, just diving a little deeper and showing you the different layers of intentional practice. And juggling, there are some skills that act as foundations for a lot of other skills. And it's important to pay attention to those early on in your juggling journey. And so you have the proper foundation in terms of posture, familiarity with coordination, footwork, and also the power production for other more advanced skills. So these foundational elements help you build what you need in order to succeed later on. And bypassing them, or being able to do one but not very consistently, and then wanting to move on too quick, is a great way to get injured because your body hasn't built the proper neural pathways and movement pathways in coordination necessary for understanding those nuances of more complex skills. So that is it for today's video, a deep dive into some important movements. We will see you in the next one.